when you're creating art and managing a project, especially in the creative space, you have to let the art breathe and you have to just let it happen and, give your creatives their room.
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action. Welcome, everybody. I'm Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, joined today by my guest and good friend, Andrew Berger. Now, Andrew is a bit of an enigma in what he does because he's an audio engineer, so he lives and breathes projects, but is not a project manager by trade. So, Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience a little bit?
Sure, Trevor, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to catch up and to dive into it. So, by trade, I'm an audio engineer. So, I've lived in recording studios, worked on albums, worked on Hollywood films, been entered in many international film festivals, and had the opportunity to win a few of them. So, that was very exciting. Many documentaries as well. So during my role focusing on those kinds of projects, I was like an audio editor. So I would have my audio team and we would kind of divide the work up. So who would do the dialogue, who would do the sound effects, and who would do what we call backgrounds. Because when you make a movie, usually the production sound is really just focused for the dialogue that the dialogue editor will edit to make sure it sounds correct and is essentially legible, but the backgrounds, you have to set the space that the actors are performing in. So it just adds a whole other layer. Like
So let me stop you right there. Let's
sure.
back up because there's a rule on the show that we don't introduce terms that nobody knows.
Good,
So,
good, good.
so let's start with kind of describing some of those terms you just used, like dialogue and all that, because I know we all know what dialogue is. That's conversation, but in the movie industry and audio world, I'm sure that there's a little bit different nuance to those terms.
Yes. So dialogue is really just anything a character says that's meant to be heard by the audience. Because we have like dialogue, like let's say we're filming a scene in a film, the dialogue would be our conversation. But if, let's say, there's a dinner party happening in the basement of my house, so you can hear it rumbling through the walls, that would actually be called walla, which is voices that you can't you're not meant to understand what's being said. So it's just like noise. So for a dinner party, let's say, it would be kind of some music, some just a lot of voices or walla talking, and then you could hear maybe footsteps and metallic forks on the plates. So you kind of just build this whole world and this realm around these characters so that you can imagine what they're going through in their lives. So when an actor says they build whole backstories for their character, it really just helps kind of flesh out who this person is. It's not just, and in the film, you're just kind of seeing this character in this moment in the film. But I guess more to the actor's side, the artist, they're imagining what this person is like every day, not just in this 2-hour segment of their lives. So it's my job as an audio engineer to kind of build around that, to like really make it whole, to make you, the viewer, like immersed in the project.
So are you the person that has to make all those weird sound effects? And I've heard the stories of like how people will wave paper to make lightning, and some of the most like have collections of the most random things to make the most random noises.
Oh yeah, I have a hard drive. It's sitting on my desk right now. It's about 3 terabytes of sound effects from gathered through colleagues and just years of work. I worked on a documentary about this restaurateur, this famous restaurant in New York, and I think it's in LA, and I imagine other, hot cities around the globe. It's called Mr. Chow. So this restaurateur, his name's Michael Chow. He essentially fused Chinese high dining restaurants with like the Italian, how those fancy restaurants are. So it was like the first time a restaurant served Chinese food by waiters in tuxedos. And that was like a big deal apparently. And then but this documentary was about how he was pivoting to become a painter and an artist. So there's a scene where they show him, there's music in the background and they show him painting and he splatters paint across his canvas. And I was sitting there for about like 20 minutes, like, what sound do I put for splattering paint? Because I didn't have that sound in my library and I didn't have paint to splatter in the room I was making those sounds in. We didn't have necessarily a what they call like a Foley pit, which is where you actually record the sounds to make those crazy like boot sound effects so that, you can get boot sound on sand, on any floor surface. That's what these rooms have. They have different floor surfaces for you to get different sounds.
And
So they actually
I'd imagine you don't record that with just a cell phone.
right, I've actually have done recordings with cell phones to get specifically to get lower quality audio, and then I just bounce or send it to the computer, and I've actually been complimented. They're like, "Wow, this sounds like
This
exactly in
sounds
this
so
room."
terrible.
Yeah, but they're like, "How did you get this, like, inflection?" And I just show them my iPhone, and they're like, "Alright, I gotta double down on this." But for this specific scene with these splattering paint, I actually used, sounds I've used for horror films, like gore sounds where, like, there's blood splattering, and it worked perfectly. It was just the wildest thing, and when I found the documentary on HBO, months later, I watched it with some friends, and when that scene came up, I was like, "Alright, what sound do you think I used for this?" And they're like, "I don't know, like, oil paints or something," and I pulled up the sound that I used, and they're like, "That is disgusting."
Is this what audio engineers do when they watch movies?
To a degree, it's very much like I'll see Dune or I'll see a Star Wars movie with some audio friends. Obviously, we'll discuss the plot of the film and the pacing and all the film nerd stuff. But then we'll go in and be like, "Did you notice this sound? Like this felt like it was cut up from this previous movie and it was like reversed." So I do find in a lot of the new Star Wars content that they reuse sounds from the original trilogy and it's just cut up and pitched so to make it sound like a higher pitch or a lower pitch. And honestly, in my opinion, I'm like, that's kind of lazy sound editing. I know, you don't mess with the mouse. So I'm sure working at Disney is like working insane hours and just being pushed to the limit. So they have what they have. But, when you're creating art and managing a project, especially in the creative space, you have to let the art breathe and you have to just let it happen and, give your creatives their room.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I want to talk about this now, like in the topic of a project, because
Yeah.
obviously the movie, or the TV show, whatever you're working on, the final media is the final product. That's the project. But
Hmm.
when you start drilling down, because I'm not too familiar with the movie industry, you've got a portfolio, which is the movie, and then underneath it, you've got different programs, which would be sound, acting, all that. And then
Yes.
inside of all those, you've got multiple projects.
So much. It's funny. When I first came into the film sound for film, I was working at a studio that also did film coloring, and I was like, "What are you talking about? Film coloring? It just goes from the camera to the editing room, and then to the sound people, and then it's on in the movie theaters." And I was very wrong, and I was educated. I'm sure you've seen the Matrix films.
Mhm.
You know how those movies have like a green tint to them? At least the first one does. So that's film coloring.
Okay. Yeah, so it's all the post-production stuff.
Yes, it's so how I worked was a film would come in and ideally they would be doing film and color at my studio. So half the work would go to the colorist and then half the work would go to the audio people. And then we would essentially marry the film, excuse me, for the director to watch and offer tips or comments on the work. So it's a lot of moving parts that we would have a producer kind of manage, but it would always kind of end up like the lead of the audio team on that project and the lead of the color team would kind of come together and we'd have group meetings about where we are on the timeline. And it was very timeline based, I would say. So you'd really have to be able to find your groove creatively within that space. So that was kind of where I struggled a bit because I like to like really take my time, low and slow, to quote Cars, the movie.
And you're told it's got to be done. And then it's a matter of I taking my time and working 20-hour days, or am I doing 8-hour days and getting it done good enough?
Right. And that's kind of in the film world, it's, we were working very much on documentaries. So it was really, it's always obviously focused on the budget, but sometimes I would have to stay late or I would just open up my computer on the weekends and just dive in because not to sound like the golden employee because I was definitely not, but I would just be like, this sound isn't good enough. This is just not what it should be. I remember I worked on a TV pilot with a bunch of NYU students. I got connected to them, and it was about a YouTuber's fall from grace. Very relatable to the Gen Z community. And there's a scene where the character's playing with Legos, and we had about 7 days to get this 20-minute pilot from sound design to full mix ready to send out to South by Southwest. So that
All
was
right,
like,
let's back up here and explain what those mean.
thank you for stopping me. I appreciate that. Should we hit like sound design and sound edited first? So this is where you add the sound effects, and sound design is like, think of Star Wars, the spaceships. It's just you put multiple sounds together to create one sound and
Or in
one
Lego,
unique.
or in Legos,
Yes.
in the Lego world, my kid's playroom.
Yes, exactly. So that would be like sound design slash like and Foley. So Foley is where you like I have like a pen right here. And if you wanted to get the sound of a pen like slapping someone's wrist because they dropped it, here my wrist is out of shot. But like you would get that actual sound recorded into the recording program, and then you can edit it further if you would like. So I guess it would be torn more into sound design, like to distort it or make it sound like whatever. Because if you think of the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park, those were kind of, I think I read recently, it was like an eagle cawing
Hmm.
and like a lion and then maybe a dog barking. And then they distorted the sounds and twisted them to make all these weird kind of grunts that the dinosaurs make along with the roaring, but the grunts and like the sounds you don't necessarily think of that an animal makes, but that adds more life and realism to that. I mean, to that film in Jurassic Park. What was that from 1990?
It's funny you bring that up because I always think of the most iconic scene from that movie of the cup with the water when the T-Rex was stomping.
Yeah,
Spielberg got the idea from that when he was stopped at a stoplight because older cars had a cup holder like that. And he
yeah,
just had a cup of water and it was from the radio that was causing the reverberations in the cup. And he stared at it at a red light and was like, I got to incorporate that somehow.
yes, exactly. Because I mean, it's a famous scene because that just creates so much tension. So like, there's that artistry again.
And and when you think about it, just doing that, the reverberations, they had to be in a perfect way that looked like a real cup, not just somebody dropped a drop of water in it and it randomly made those vibrations.
Right. I imagine there are probably a few ways they did that. I'm curious if there was just someone under the car or something. Just, I don't remember the scene specifically from the movie, but I wonder if there was someone like tapping it like under the cup, or if they actually had speakers in the room producing a specific frequency that the water in the cup reacted to.
Yeah,
So
you put
there,
way more thought into this than I did.
you're good. I mean, that's because I mean, all sound is really just vibrations.
Hmm.
So you don't necessarily, I mean, why would anyone think about this? But they're sound waves, so they go up and down. It's compression and refraction, I think is the word. So, I mean, my daily is reading these, so I can essentially look at these waves and seeing how a person talks. I know like what it looks like in these sound waves versus other words, let's say. So when I'm editing a podcast, I listen to it obviously for sound quality, but I know where the is because I know what they call a waveform, what it looks like.
So let's go back to the topic, which is the
Yes.
project. And when you're working on a project as an audio engineer,
Hmm.
obviously you've got the schedule of when the audio needs to be done and mixed to be able to send it off for the future and for the next step and all that.
Hmm.
how are you managing this with teams? Because it sounds like there's got to be a head engineer, but multiple people underneath you or underneath that head engineer.
Definitely. It's really discussing with the client. So originally I would say a client almost usually doesn't they don't know the finishing process of anything. So the client, not to speak poorly of the client, but it's not their expertise.
Nor
So
should it be.
right, exactly. That's why they're hiring me and other professional audio engineers. So a client might think, let's say a podcast episode. So they think a podcast episode should take, if it was a 1 hour recording, it should take a professional audio engineer 1 hour to edit, which is not the case due to many different factors. And then we'll dive into movies as well. But with a podcast, you have so many variables, which is the dangerous part. I mean, in any business. So you don't know the quality of the audio that you're being given. You don't know how long, or, an hour podcast, there could be 25 minutes of nonsense being said, or pieces may not have been recorded, or the client may have wanted a certain section moved to earlier or later in the recording.
And
So
the
there's all
ums and
these,
uhs.
yes, and the ums and uhs. I mean, that's pretty basic. I would say getting rid of that. But even with the ums and uhs, I prefer to leave a few in, because a perfect podcast doesn't exist. I prefer kind of more realism. So if someone says before every sentence, obviously I will delete that, but maybe I'll sprinkle a few in so that you could tell that either the person's thinking, or I'll delete the but I'll create like a pause so that it's not just like into the next thing. You'll kind of you create that anticipation and that pondering for the listener to be like, wow, the host of that podcast was like really thinking deeply. That was cool. And then with movies for the project, see, there you go. I said again. So for the project with the TV pilot, I really sat down with my friend, and it was just like, all right, we have about 7 to 10 days to do this. So the client's coming in on day 10 for mix. And I decided my friend was gonna mix because that's more his expertise at that time. And I was just gonna do the sound editing. So the footsteps, the the Lego sounds when I had to actually open my own Lego set to make the Lego sounds. There's another the atmospheres, because it takes place in California, so you had to kind of imagine what California suburbia might sound like. Birds, sunshine, trees in the wind. So I sat with him and I said, "How many days do you need to mix this and to do the dialogue?" And my friend said, "I'll do the dialogue now, and it'll take me, let's say, 3 days. So if you can get me the sound effects and backgrounds in 3 to 4 days, I can get on this mix, and then we could have essentially 2 days of like a bumper. So if I need extra sound effects or I need extra audio from the client, we can cross that bridge and then we'll go into mix." And I said, perfect. So we really tag team this. And by day 10, the client came in, they had 2 or 3 notes, but nothing significant related, something that we fixed in the mixing room in that moment. Then we shipped it off to the client, who sent it to South by Southwest to be entered in the independent TV show category.
And how'd that end up?
We won. So it was fantastic. Another small example was I came in for a mix on a movie that's actually on Netflix now. It's I'll give a short plug later, but there was a scene in the film where a character deliberately ruins a family dinner by pulling all the food out of the oven and drops it on the floor. And we were deciding with the director and the mixing engineer and me as, I guess, a sound editor consultant on this film. Do we want to hear the sounds of the food falling onto the floor, or do we want to keep it like operatic and keep the music kind of the main focus to kind of give this like slow motion, my life is falling apart moment where it's just a scene of chaos? So, like, do you want the realism of hearing the thing on the floor, of being in the room with the character? Or do you want it to be the cinematic moment where the viewer has to imply that this character is just going through, they just don't know what is happening to themselves right now. And I was for the sound taking the main stage, but when the brisket hits the floor, I wanted that thud. But we decided to have that the brisket thud to be very low in the mix. So you wouldn't notice it unless you knew it was there. So I guess audio people also leave a lot of kind of Easter eggs for their fellow audio colleagues to see if they could hear it.
Or you get new stuff every when you watch it for the fifth time.
Oh yes, we that movie's been played at many festivals. The director, he can't even watch the movie anymore. He just sits outside, and then when the movie's over, he goes in for the Q&A sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine it's just like with any creator. You create something. Once you say, I'm finally done with it, you're like, I'm done with it. I don't want to watch it anymore because I'm just going to have notes about it and want to change things and mess with it. And
Yes.
that's part of the reason that I think it's so great that you edit podcasts, because then the creators of those shows don't have to re-listen to it and do all that.
Thank you. I agree. I mean, I feel like there's two ends of the spectrum, but I want to say up front, being an audio engineer, the biggest thing that I've learned from mentors is you have to be decisive. So there was obviously a time where I was in the seat and I said, "Oh, I can make this better." Those were more in my music days. "Oh, I could," or even in film, "I could get a better sound effect for this." Let me spend an hour finding the best paint splattering sound effect. And then it was an hour of my time that was where I could have been 20 minutes down the line of this feature length, 75 to 90-minute documentary. So feature length is actually, I think it's 60 minutes or longer because an LP is 45 minutes or longer and an EP is anything before that. That's just knowledge. I actually might be wrong about the feature length films, but 90 minutes is usually about the length of a regular movie these days.
So when we talk about I'm going to go back to movies just because that's
Please.
where we are. Now, when we talk about working on those projects, how many different teams are there simultaneously just working on the audio piece alone, never mind all the other tangential parts of a movie?
I would say when I was at the studio, it was about 3 people. So we had 3 people and we would divide it up. So the head of audio would take on the dialogue because that is kind of what takes the longest. And that's, the head of the audio department would be you know, the manager, the controller, essentially.
The
Like that.
PM.
Yes. And so then I would take on sound effects. And if it was a longer or more difficult project, there would be 2 people on sound effects and then another person on the background effects, which was creating the atmospheres that the characters lived in this project. And there was one project we worked on, which was like I found to be extremely difficult, and it was very interesting because it was about a Native American and trying and for this person to try to hold on to their culture and share it with people in the Midwest. So this person was very passionate about their native dances, and there were scenes where you saw this person butchering a bison actually. So we had to make all the sounds of this person butchering a bison in the middle of winter in the Midwest outside. So we had to create like all these wind sound effects, snow sound effects, like hard icy snow like on the floor, scraping the floor while he's hacking away at this animal. Not to get like too graphic, but that probably took an entire day to like get right, to get the
And
right sounds in.
you're layering them on top of each other. So one sound in a vacuum could be perfect, but then when you layer it on top of two or three other ones, it gets washed out or it just doesn't sound right.
Exactly, and then you're managing the amount of sounds for this duration. So these in the audio editing software, they call them sessions because, recording sessions, I guess that's just what it became. Like, rock music session in this software maybe is for me personally, is maybe about 25 individual tracks or layers of sound. This is like hundreds because you separate it, the sound effects, the background effects, the dialogue tracks, the music tracks, and each area has its own amount of tracks, and you're always essentially creating more tracks because you want to add more layers because you'll be in the software, you'll be like, oh, wait, I found this sound. This sounds nice. Let's add this in.
Yeah,
So,
I was
yeah.
playing with that with just making the intro to the show, and that was only 2 or 3 layers, and I was like, "I am lost."
Oh, yeah. It is. I mean, especially when you're in like an online, were you, I guess, doing that in Riverside?
No, it was
Excuse me.
no, I was doing that with what I think it was whatever's on my computer.
So probably like Audacity or GarageBand, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
No, yeah, it gets like very in depth. I mean, and you look at those programs, and there's a lot of buttons, and with someone who doesn't really know how to use it, you think you're going to press a button and then everything will get deleted. There's this anxiety factor to it.
The undo was really helpful.
Oh, yes. I've been in situations where I needed undo and I couldn't undo enough times. So I needed to start from a previous version of the session and come back to and build up my other 7 hours of work.
So
So
the
the
lesson
life
in
of an
that
audio
is
engineer.
yeah, the lesson in that is save often.
Yeah. Oh,
Save often
yes.
and save
It is
multiple
like now.
files.
Yes, it is like a tick now. I do command save every like 5 minutes. I should probably do it more actually. But anytime I make a big change or, an effective change.
See what I did there? I left a pause.
You did. It was great. I held it. I wasn't sure if I should add to it, but I let it happen. Let it fly. Better
See?
than an.
Yeah. And then if I don't like it, I can always fix it in post.
Yes, exactly. It is funny. I've worked on many projects where the directors or the musicians, let's say a big thing is playing in time or out of time. And they're like, "We'll fix it in post," like playing in time, like asking the audio engineer to cut their recording in time. And that takes so many more hours. It's like, learn to play the song correctly first, and you'll save me time
Yeah.
and you'll save yourself money.
Yeah, it's always we'll fix it in post, and then there's only so much you can do in post.
Yes, I mean, with AI tools these days, there's a lot more you can do and it'll save you time. But there's always things on the back end, even after the AI repairs, that you need to fix. I worked on a podcast where they were recording in a conference room, and conference rooms are very echoey, very reverberant, and it was two people in a glass room. So all you heard was the echo and the reverb. You didn't even hear where the initial sound source was coming from. So you didn't hear their voice, you heard the echo. And I was telling the client, I said, I'll do what I can, but you know, we're not going to sound like Joe Rogan on this episode.
Yeah.
I've Yeah, no, I found an AI tool that actually saved the recording. I think people who are not audio engineers would use this AI tool and put it at 100% and be like, "Yes, 100%, it'll save it everything." But I finagled it to like 43% because I knew on the back end I'd be able to save it more with manual editing and cleaning up volume levels.
Well, I think that's a great place for us to pause and plug the Patreon because that's how the audience can support the show is with every guest I have on, they do a bonus episode called the postmortem interview where we're going to dive deeper into some of Andrew's experience being part of projects and being so to speak, a cog in the bigger project and working with teams and how he manages that in the movies and TV shows that he's done because that's all project management, that's all program and portfolio management, and it's always good to hear from somebody who doesn't understand all the time what they're doing, but has dealt with it on a large scale.
Definitely.
So back to the topics at hand, and we can move into something different, which is kind of talking about what's your process for how you do this, because you've got to have some type of a repeatable and scalable process.
It's hard to really put it into words, the processes, because each project is slightly different. I'll give you an insight into post production when I work on commercials, I would say. So
Ooh, I have a question about that right now.
please.
So, does the audio engineer deliberately design certain commercials to be super loud and obnoxious?
So over probably about for the past 10 years, I would say they're over now. but the audio engineers were battling this thing called the loudness wars. So it's where TV and Spotify and all these streaming platforms had different loudness standards, and they're measured in LUFS, which is loudness unit full scale.
Everyone knows that naturally.
It's exactly, which is why I wanted to share the full acronym.
That's a rule on the show. You know that.
Got you. I'm learning. So let's say for TV, it would be minus 23 decibels because that's how it's measured in negatives. So commercials are louder. Actually, they're louder also historically to grab your attention. So they would historically be louder than the actual TV show.
By design.
Yes, by design. And it stinks because you'll watch a movie on TBS or something, and the movie has to hit very specific sound levels to be in movie theaters, and then the TV version, because the mixing engineer is not only printing, they call it printing the mix because they used to print to tape. When I say printing the mix, all my friends think that I'm printing on a printer, and they're like, how am I going to hear that? So they print the mix, which is essentially having all the sounds record itself into one track. And that track is either a stereo file, so left, right, or it's a 5.1 track, which is essentially most home theaters. So there's like 3 speakers in the front and 2 in the back, and maybe a subwoofer is the point one.
Well, now you're
So,
getting into why THX was created.
yeah, exactly. I think that was George Lucas too,
It
right?
was. It was Lucasfilms for the original was created for Star Wars because he was disappointed in the audio and wasn't willing to
Right,
release the movie until the audio was up because because he did so much work on it.
right. And I mean, we could get into that whole, the sound design on that. Ben Burr, just a hero and a legend, and just pushed the audio industry forward by decades. So he's a real hero for audio people. So where was I? So the 5.1 and the commercials, they're under a different rule set, I would say, than a TV show or a film, because a film has needs to be at negative 23 decibels when it's in the theater, but then you have to kind of mix it down to a different volume level for the TV release. So essentially, you'll release a film to the movie theater, but before you do that, you'll have to make sure you reach compliance. Kind of like well, not a financial advisor, but they have a lot of
Yeah.
compliance as well. And you'll send the mix to. I had this issue actually. I sent a mix to Disney, so I sent them the full mix, and then they want breakdowns of the mix because they're going to re-record it in different languages as well. And you'll put it into an AI or like a platform proprietary that they have, and they'll let you know if you failed or passed the compliance.
So when you make so when a movie is being made, if I'm
Hmm.
understanding you right, you've got to make the mix for the theater, the mix for the DVD, the mix for the Blu-ray, the mix for TV later because you're assuming that it's going to get put on TV with commercials, and probably the mix for streaming now too.
Pretty much, yeah. So you try to kind of have it all set. And, for some of these projects, obviously, they'll have a third party person doing that after the main re recording mixer completes it. I mean, especially Disney, they have in house people that could do that part as long as I finish the mix.
So is that why when you hear people talking about music, that's why they say that's the master?
So the master is a little different, actually. So the master it's funny. So you have the mix, and then the music is mastered because it's traditionally to give another set of ears to the mix before it gets released to the public. And the mastering engineer is able to kind of manipulate the full mix, whereas the mixing engineer only manipulates each individual track. So the mastering engineer is given much less to work with, but they have like many other tools to really make it sound bigger and louder in your ears. The mastering engineer brings it to volume for streaming services, but traditionally for records and CDs from back in the excuse me, from back in the day. I'm sorry, you'll have to make those cuts.
Oh, it's fine. Might even leave them in.
Do it. Leave it in.
It's all about authenticity, right?
Very much keeping it an honest conversation and keeping it real so the listeners in the room with us.
And I can't afford an engineer like you.
Don't worry, I got you. I got you. I'm happy to edit for you with you.
So, to kind of wrap this up, let's wrap this up with handing the floor over to you. And why don't you tell the audience if they want to find out more about what you're up to, where you are, what you're into? Floor is
Yeah.
yours.
Thank you, Trevor. So, along with my experience in film and TV and music, I took a turn to really get and connect with clients who are really trying to make a difference in the world. And I found the best way to do that with my audio skills was through podcast production and, a little bit of marketing and a content creation advice, we'll call it. And that's my company, PodClimb. So I like to work with, CEOs and just people who are really trying to just make a difference in the world. I work with nonprofits who are pivoting to a podcasting platform because they're seeing so many changes in how people consume media. And, people have this dream potentially of becoming a Joe Rogan and having a studio like that, but most people aren't able to have a setup like that. So I'm here to kind of coach them through and create their own podcasting haven, let's say, and put a track on it so that it can grow and it's not just a podcast. It doesn't become a podcast where you just sit with your friends and discuss the latest news or the latest X. It actually has a track and a strategy so that you can attract the people that you want to be around, the people that you want to work with or work for, and you can become a leader or a top voice in your field and inspire others to really just make the world a better place.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll have links in the show notes to get in touch with you.
Love it.
And I almost forgot my personalized question for you.
Please.
So, with your work in the audio industry,
Mhm.
if you could go back in time and work on one record, replace the engineer for that, what would it be?
Well, that's tough. That's a great, what part of me wants to say Rubber Soul or A Hard Day's Night because I'd be in the room with the Beatles producer and obviously in the Beatles as well. Another record that would be interesting would probably be any Steely Dan record, probably Asia.
Ooh, was not expecting that one out of you.
I Steely Dan, they hate this term, but yacht rock, something about just that genre, that soft rock, but technically skilled musicians, but in this kind of soft and quiet intensity fascinates me.
Well, I mean, Jimmy Buffett created it.
Yes.
And I had never heard of him until I was in college and my fraternity worked security for one of his
Wow.
concerts. And I'm just sitting there listening to this going, okay, this isn't bad. And just watching the whole show of a Jimmy Buffett concert for the first time.
He's fantastic. I was able to see him once. He has his when I saw him, I think it was 2017, he had this whole huge band and he shows up. I mean, he's Jimmy Buffett. He shows up barefoot with his acoustic guitar, wearing his Hawaiian shirt and shorts. He was the real deal. He lived what he preached. So you
Yeah. And
can't you
then,
can't hate that.
and then he franchised it.
Yeah. He had his restaurants and then he also had his beer brand. What not Dogfish Head, Land Shark, right?
Yeah. Andy's got retirement homes now.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's
There's actual retirement homes run by, they're probably licensed by his estate. Yeah.
of course.
There's like Margaritaville retirement homes. I think they're in Florida.
Wow. That makes me a little more interested in going to a retirement home. I've heard many people say you don't go there by choice, you end up there. I don't know, but Margaritaville sounds exciting
I
to
don't know.
me.
I kind of look at a retirement home as an all-inclusive vacation.
You know what? Maybe it's the different tiers. I think a 55 plus community might be more exciting than living in. I have a relative who's in a retirement home and they have like the room with the special hospital bed and that's a little depressing for me
Yeah.
and for them, but the 55 plus Margaritaville, that I could be a customer.
You could be down for that?
I think so. I'll have a cheeseburger in paradise.
Yeah, and you know it's not gonna be in a cold climate.
Yes, exactly. I mean, all the Jimmy Buffett fans, I think they're called parrot heads. Have you heard
They are.
this?
And go ahead.
I was gonna say, would you consider yourself a parrot head?
I am not, but I think my father-in-law would definitely consider himself one. I listen to the music, but I'm not it's not a lifestyle.
Yeah, I agree. There are bands I follow that have their own kind of cult following. With the fans have their own names, and I'm like, I'm adjacent to them. I enjoy the band, I enjoy the music, but I'm not that diehard.
Yeah, we're not I mean, we can go into the Insane Clown Posse, and that's a whole 'nother rabbit hole to go down.
I've never even heard of that. What is
Oh, you've never heard of them?
Insane Clown? Is that a band or is that their
That's
fan
a
base?
band. Their fan base are called, I think it's the Juggalos, and they've been around for probably over 20 years,
New to
and
me.
every year they have a gathering. It's called what is it? It's the Gathering of the Juggalos or something. It is where just pure insanity occurs. What's funny is they'll talk to people at the event, and they'll be like normal everyday couples, people from every walk of life. They go to the event, they paint their
Whoa.
faces, go buck wild, and then when they leave, they go back to normal life, and it's just a weekend of insanity.
Sounds like Burning Man or, like a more intense.
Like it's kind of like that, but it's one of those things where it's one weekend or one event that everybody goes to, and then you just walk away and you got it out of your system, or that's just what you do.
That makes me think of the people that promote having one purge day a year in the world.
Oh man, now we're not going into that.
No.
But the sound effects from that movie,
Oh, yes. I mean, the sound effects from that, I mean, Interstellar, great sound effects. Dune, oh my gosh. And obviously Star Wars, but I I think Trevor, and after this conversation, I think if you I'm not sure if you're a Star Wars fan or not. Um,
I dabble.
got you. So if you dabbled, I think if you watched one of the original trilogy films and then you went back to watch episode 7, you would see a lot of overlap or hear a lot of overlap in sound design.
I believe it.
Um, because the sounds in the prequel trilogy I thought were pretty unique and original to those 3 films.
Well, I think that's a great place to end.
Yeah.
You know, go ahead and look Andrew up. All of his links are going to be in the show notes if you want to work with him and get his expert touch on your podcast or your audio engineering. I want to take a moment and thank the listeners, thank the subscribers on the Patreon, because that's how this show keeps going, is being able to have that support and those people that help keep this show going. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow on all the major platforms. If you want to see the video, it's in YouTube and Spotify as well. And I'll end like I always do. May all your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For Andrew Berger, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM. Thanks for listening.